This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor with this week's cattle market update. After the cattle outlook, he also covers feedlot returns and the meat demand monitor. K-State beef reproduction specialist Sandy Johnson continues the show as she discusses the importance of handling and storing semen tanks with liquid nitrogen properly. Another segment of Faces in Agriculture rounds out today's show. John Schweizer with Alpha Ag Air talks about how he got into the ariel application business and how the challenges his business has faced are similar to most in agriculture. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update. And this week we're joined by K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Glynn, kicking off our cattle market conversation with what is cash cattle looking like?
Yeah, this past week was, I would call it a mixed bag, depending on if we're looking at feeders or fed, cash or the board. Let's first look at cash, as you said. So fed cattle, 5 area was 186. I'd call that no trend on the week. Kind of depends on what day we'd be comparing to. When you look over to feeder cattle, the Pratt market's the one I took some notes on. AMS called that, it depends on the weight class, but about $5 higher this past week. A couple lots of note, 125 head weighing 620 pounds, came in at $297, so just below $3 calf price. And then a much heavier lot, 518 head weighing 963, came at $225. Those would both be on par if the calves be maybe a hair lower than a couple weeks before. When we flip it over the board, so that's the cash summary. CME futures contracts, I just quoted both the April contracts for both here. Live cattle, 187.5, down 50 cents for the week. So fed cattle, not much movement to put a bow on that. And then feeder cattle is actually down $3. The April nearby contract, it closed below 254. That is at odds with what I gave you on the cash market there. So a little bit of split in the feeder cattle arena.
And what about for box beef cutout?
Yeah, so not a lot of movement there this week either. Choice was up $2 when we look at Friday versus the Friday before at 307, and Select came in $1 higher at 297. So not much to talk about in the wholesale market as well.
And as we usually do when you come in and talk, Glenn, looking at feedlot returns.
Yeah, so quick shout out. Those that fill out these surveys for Justin Wagner over in the Animal Science and Industries Department, thank you for doing that. Please continue doing it. I use that information in this effort. Usually about the middle of the month, I take information from there, couple with Kansas fed cattle, feeder cattle, corn, and come up with these net returns. The punchline of that and the latest numbers that you can find on our Ag Manager website suggests that we're starting the year here in 2024. If you're unhedged, so if you bought feeder cattle at cash, sold fed cattle at cash, and bought grain as you went, so what this is mimicking, you're selling steers at a loss through April, and basically by the time we get to May, we have a break-even situation, and then we have a few months of a positive projected return, positive return that is. What's underneath that difference as we move through 2024 is feeder prices. So placement prices have definitely been elevated. We've been talking about that for some time. Fed cattle market pulled back as 2023 concluded, and that's showing up here on depressing your sales price. So the net of that is adverse margins, certainly in Q1, most of second quarter, or at least the volume around the April month in second quarter. And then finally we get to where the fed cattle market's expected to give us a positive return.
So something where producers might want to look at using some risk management tools?
Always a good idea to push the pencil. These projections sort of exaggerate how low and how high things are because they mimic a totally unhedged. A large share of the volume in the feedlot industry has at least one, if not parts of all three legs, feed, feeder cattle, and fed cattle, this main margin hedged. So keep that in mind. Several are using those risk management tools is the point.
And always wanting to talk about the meat demand monitor when you're in, Glenn. And first off, looking at the willingness to pay.
Yeah, so the latest information we have is for the month of February, and a summary on demand in February compared to January is domestic retail, so think grocery store for at-home consumption. Demand was up for 6 of the 8 evaluated products, which is great. So, you look down through here, I believe ribeye steak was slightly lower, but most of the main meat items we track were up. Conversely, we'll look over to food service. February demand for dinner meals away from home compared to January was lower in all 8 examine cases. So whether it was a hamburger center of the plate, pork chop, baby back ribs, the main items we tracked there, we had some slippage in February. And that feeds into the other thing that I wanted to highlight from that base report is I've been talking at nausea for at least 6 months on financial sentiment. So the typical person is concerned on their finances. And it's important to clarify sentiment isn't the same as the bottom line. They tend to be very related, but you can have a break even or getting slightly ahead kind of thing from an accounting perspective, but you still don't feel comfortable or you're not optimistic that things are going to get better, and therefore your sentiment is going to be eroding. And I think that aligns with what I've been talking about for several months. The vast majority of the public continue to report that their finances are either the same or worse from a sentiment perspective. They're not comfortable about it compared to a year ago. And in February specifically, only 18% say their household finances feel better than they were a year earlier. Why is that relevant for this meat demand discussion? Is geeks like me outside of this project would say that meat is an expensive item, and we tend to see meat demand grow with your income. And one step from that is if you're comfortable around your income and finances, meat demand is stronger. And we see that in spades month after month in the meat demand monitor. The part I highlighted in February specifically is those that say they're feeling worse off about their finances are spending quite a bit less away from home. So the change they're making is in foot traffic and what they're willing to spend at a restaurant as opposed to foot traffic at a grocery store and what they're buying to take home. So they're making that pivot, and that aligns with what I just gave you a minute ago about the February versus January demand change.
But still willing to eat meat, just not out at a restaurant.
Yeah, and they're making adjustments such as, they might be trading down from steak to non-steak at the restaurant, or maybe they're having their steak when they go to the grocery store and they're cooking it themselves. Those kind of adjustments are cross-channel and cross-cut.
And Glenn, as we're talking about financial sentiment, looking and comparing it back to previous years as well.
Yeah, so in February, I put out what I'd call special report. So we just got to talking about the standard 4-page monthly report, comes out all the time. And periodically myself or Justin Biener or other PhD students that help me with this project here at K-State, we'll do one-offs looking at, called a deep dive in all things that the meat demand monitor lets us look at. And we did that on this macroeconomic issue about financial sentiment. So you can find this report. There's lots of figures and tables in it. I'm going to draw a bow around it. But the reason I'm doing it now is there's a lot of discussion of and this gets into it's an election year, so it's coming up about the state of the economy. Is the worst of inflation behind us? Will we have a second bout? Or my job, or is my wages going to keep up with the higher cost of living? All those we've been talking about for a while, but they're getting elevated again. Now we're talking, March of 24. So what I did was I went back and looked at all 4 years of data. So we have data from February 2020 through February 24 now, and we can look at this sentiment issue I was talking about. And quick reminder, by year, we were most optimistic as a nation in 2021. Looking at just the most recent 4 years. Not surprisingly, in 2020, when the pandemic hit, people were concerned. 2021, the pandemic got a little bit better. This is pre-inflation. We had federal government aid, floating around, all those kind of things. So financial sentiment improved. Not by surprise, Shelby. Meat demand improved in 2021, and I detail that at nausea again in this report. But whether you were feeling better about your finances or not, all groupings had stronger meat demand in 2021 than 2020, which pulled up a lot of meat prices and with it livestock prices in 2021. That's the history lesson from there. Fast forward to the most recent 2 years, we've had slippage on household sentiment. So, and that's what I just broke down for February 24. The same thing on balance is held for the last 2 years. And the important part there is with it, we saw erosion of demand. So retail and food service demand that I just got done talking about for February 24, we can look at it for the whole calendar year of 22, whole calendar year of 23. That's what we do in this report. And in 2022, we still had stronger demand by those that said their finances were improving, but not by the other groups. And by the time we got to 2023, all residents, regardless of their financial sentiment, were signaling weaker meat demand than in 2022. So think some staying power from this financial sentiment. Probably those that said their finances were doing better in 22 happen to have benefited more from the stock market rally in 2021, and or they had a job change that others didn't that made them kind of keep up the cost of living. So if inflation wasn't hitting them as hard, those kind of things are probably why they were in that position, and they were the main source of some staying power on meat demand in 2022. So 22 demand was sort of flat, but it was up for that group and down for the others, so it was flat for the country is what I'm trying to impress on everybody. And by the time we got to 2023, that had all eroded, and it weighed on meat demand as we went through 23.
And Glenn, wanting to mention some upcoming events if they'd like to hear more about the cattle market or other things related to cattle.
Yeah, so I put the shout out around the feedlot returns earlier. I did the same thing a week ago at Cattleman's Day. I'm highlighting that because one of the things I like about Cattleman's Day, and this one was unique because it's the last one we're going to do in the old Weber setup, is typically that team, Justin Wagner, AJ Tarpoff, and the group that pulls that off now, they get videos of those talks. And if you want a long version of what we did this morning, I gave a full talk at Cattleman's Day. You should be able to find it on the website. Probably this week. A week from now, I'm going to be in Nashville for the annual meat conference. If anybody happens to take a wrong turn and they're quite a ways east of here, they're welcome to join us. And then a week from Thursday, I'll be in Salina. I'm speaking at the Mid-America Farm Expo for the first time. Excited to join that group, and I'll be giving an extended beef cattle outlook there. If you are going to be there, come and shake my hand and let's enjoy it.
For people who are wanting to see this meat demand monitor and previous ones, where can they do that?
AgManager.info. For listeners that aren't familiar, that broader website is the main website where our whole Department of Agriculture Economics here at K-State posts a host of outreach extension resources. I mentioned the feedlot returns. That's a monthly effort. The meat demand monitor, lots of Excel decision aids I reference in Outlook talks, those kind of things from, quote unquote, Glynn's efforts are there. But it's not just me. Dan O'Brien's on here regularly. He's got a lot of things on there. And I have several other colleagues in the department. So if you're not familiar with that website, I encourage you to go to AgManager.info.
Glynn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our cattle market update.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Once again, you can find his meat demand monitor and feedlot returns report by going to AgManager.info. And then you can find his full presentation from Cattleman's Day on this topic, which should be up this week on ksubeef.org. I will link both of those in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show discussing good habits for handling liquid nitrogen. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State beef reproduction specialist Sandy Johnson. Sandy, thanks for joining us once again.
Happy to be here.
Sandy, as we're talking about liquid nitrogen, really something important for all species. And we know liquid nitrogen is very, very cold. And so what happens when it gets exposed to warmer temperatures?
We think of the boiling point of something, we think of water and it's very hot, but actually the boiling point of liquid nitrogen is sub-zero. And so as it becomes exposed to the atmosphere, it is really boiling or vaporizing. And, the vessels that we store liquid nitrogen in are intended to vent. In many of our semen tanks, that's occurring around the canisters, the lifter that's on the canister, or they have some will have a pressure relief valve as well. And what we don't want to do is get in a situation where that tank cannot vent. Say we got some moisture on the stopper, and if we put it back in and it freezes in place, that can cause the tank to explode. And of course, that would be much more excitement than we'd want on our daily lives. So that part is very important to understand, that venting is a normal part of the process.
And as that liquid nitrogen is getting vented out, what can it possibly do to the oxygen in the air?
What happens then, say I've never done this, but I've heard of people thinking it was fun to pour a little liquid nitrogen out on something, might be a bug or little, science experiment there. It's going to displace the oxygen in the area. And that could be up to 700 times the we don't think about the air is taking up volume, but it does. But the nitrogen will displace about 700 times what it is inside that tank as a liquid when it's exposed to this atmosphere, or, our normal atmosphere. So the real dangerous part then is if there's something in a closed environment, and there's been incidences of this happening where, say, maybe a bigger facility that's handling lots of semen in big nitrogen tanks, since they're filling one tank, and somehow the fill tube starts going on the floor. So then the person in that area can become asphyxiated because there is no oxygen left in that immediate environment. And if you were on the outside looking in, you may not know that's what's happening. And, just like in some other poisonous gas situations, somebody goes in to rescue them and they too are overcome. And so we need to understand that about liquid nitrogen and make sure that, one, we're handling the tanks properly so it does its normal venting. Two, we want to avoid keeping a tank in a closed environment. We wouldn't want to put it in a closet that wasn't unvented, or, even I haven't seen a barn that's built so tight that there was not a little ventilation, but there could be some newer barns that, we put it in this closet and there's no ventilation, and for whatever reason the tank is leaking more and somebody opens the door and, again, we have this no oxygen effect.
Even going down to the smaller scale, ABS Global did a research study on this, and really important to keep in mind also your pickup trucks and where you're transporting liquid nitrogen tanks at.
Right. With our today's pickup trucks with their added cabs, it's very convenient to try and put that in the back seat. But what we need to recognize is that ventilation is continuing all the time. And what they did was wanted to see how quickly the oxygen level might change in the cab of a pickup. And so they took 2 freshly filled tanks. And of course, that's going to have somewhat of a bearing on how much vapor is being vented. But within just a few minutes, the oxygen level in that pickup cab was no longer safe, or it wouldn't support life. And so I know some people have gone down the road this way and they're still alive, but how tightly the pickup cab was sealed, or window was open, or other ventilation, the fullness of the tank. Yeah, you may have lived through it, but understand that really this is truly a danger and not the place we want to carry these tanks.
And also important when transporting tanks, whether in your cab or really anywhere, need to keep them upright.
You think about that, we got it in the cab of the pickup, and the study that ABS started out with was just the tank sitting up. But if they spill over or, turn on their side and we've got liquid nitrogen running out, that's dangerous even faster. So if we're transporting them, we really need to have them secured away from where the human compartment is. And if that just absolutely can't be the case, then you're rolling with the windows down and making sure there's plenty of ventilation.
And as we're thinking about that tank, important to just protect the tank and not let it get damaged.
Right. We see it as a metal tank. Well, it's aluminum. And so it functions on a good seal between an inner and outer tank. And so, if it gets banged up so it has a dent, that dent could actually impact that vacuum seal between the inner and outer portion of that. And if there is some type of damage to the tank, generally we're going to begin to see frost around that area of damage. And at that point, if you start seeing frost, then you just have a few hours before you can need to get what you have in that tank and want to keep viable somewhere else.
And one more thing to think about for the tank, making sure it's up off the ground.
We don't want to cause premature wear by, dragging that tank across cement, or even, you think about it, I'm just going to turn it a little bit. Somebody set it down a different way and I need to turn it to open it up or look at something else. So it just begins to wear on it, and also, manure is corrosive. So if it's sitting by the chute and it gets real dirty, I'm not sure how much it would take, but, it is corrosive. We want to keep it clean and free of anything that would damage the integrity of it, and make sure that it's doing its job properly.
And doing its job properly is really important because we want to also protect those assets that are within that tank.
That's right. As we think just about good habits around our tanks, we want to be checking them regularly to see what the level is. If the level is changing, we expect it to, the amount that we're going to measure in it, we'd stick a wooden or plastic stick down in the center and we can measure that in inches or centimeters and do that on a regular basis. Well, if it starts dropping much more rapidly, then we're guessing we have a problem. And so we need to monitor that on a regular basis, make sure there's enough in there, because, the investment in that tank can be huge, and we want to keep those cells viable for our intended purpose.
And keeping those cells viable, also important to consider if needing to transport it from one tank to another.
there's going to be times when we have to move straws around, and maybe your semen company representative is bringing you what you're going to use this year, or you're picking it up from somewhere else. You want to use good handling techniques. And, anytime we have those canes exposed more than 10 seconds and maybe even less than that, when we're thinking about the quarter cc straws, they really have more surface area exposed. Handling is more sensitive. We need to do that very rapidly. So, we need to have our plan in place, make sure we got a spot that we're going to go to. It takes two people to do that. We never want to, we want to minimize the time any of those canes are above the frost line. And that would involve when we're transferring from one tank to the other.
And as they're transferring from one tank to the other, do people need to maybe have a little bit of protective equipment on?
You bet. The liquid nitrogen can cause severe burns. And, if you see this when you're filling a tank, that the droplets of liquid nitrogen can bounce. And in some cases, straw may be flawed and has some, the seal fails. And when you expose it to the air, there's actually been liquid nitrogen inside of that straw, and you might put it in the water and it kind of explodes out of there. Or there may be other instances where there might be some drop of liquid nitrogen. And so not only do we have a projectile that could impact our eyes, but, if you got a drop of liquid nitrogen in your eye, it's going to be a really bad thing. Okay. So safety glasses, gloves, tweezers, so that, you're protecting your hands and your eyes from those problems. And can't imagine anybody would be out handling semen in open-toed shoes, but, not a good idea either, just because, again, the damage would be very immediate and severe should something happen and you actually got liquid nitrogen on your bare skin.
Sandy, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some things to keep in mind when dealing with liquid nitrogen.
You bet. Glad to be here.
That was K-State Beef Reproduction Specialist, Sandy Johnson. You can read more on this topic from her recent Beef Tips article titled Practice Good Habits to Ensure Safety When Handling Liquid Nitrogen Tanks. You can find this by going to ksubeef.org, or I will also link it in today's show notes, which, as always, you're able to find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have another segment of Faces in Agriculture up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with another segment of Faces in Agriculture. And this week we're joined by someone that is in agriculture in Reno County, John Schweizer. John, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Appreciate the opportunity to be on.
John, can you tell us a little bit about your agriculture business?
So I am a part owner and operator of Alpha Ag Air LLC that operates mainly out of Lyons, Kansas, but we service a lot of the surrounding areas. And we are an aerial application crop dusting business, do fungicide, herbicide, and insecticide, fertilizer on both cropland and pasture in Reno, Rice, and surrounding counties, and also down into southern Kansas and up into northern Kansas.
So how did you become an aerial applicator?
Well, it's a pretty long story, but the short version is I grew up on a farm in Reno County and basically saw a crop duster flying one day and thought, I got to do that job. So I then contacted a bunch of different pilots, found out the way to do that, and fast forward a couple years, and 2020 was my first spray season, and here we are in 2024, getting ready to begin season number 5.
So with these past few years, what have been some of your biggest challenges?
I would say that our biggest challenges have been the drought, probably, because the drought, obviously, due to the lower health and yields of crops, guys don't want to spend money, so the airplane is kind of the last thing to be called. So our acres have been down drastically versus the 2020 and 2021, where we had kind of moisture and good wheat crop. So the drought has hit us pretty hard. and we're kind of hoping to be optimistic for 2024, but we will see. It's getting a little dry.
And what have been some important things for you guys to all be successful at Alpha Ag Air?
I would say that one of the things that has been critical to our success, and it's one thing that I really enjoy and take a lot of pride in, is our relationships with our customers. They're not just customers for us, they're friends and family. And, I grew up with a lot of kids who are now taking over farms or working on farms. I know, grew up in the area. And so everyone that we fly for is friends and family. And we really enjoy that. And we like even new customers, really like to get to know them, because the better I know you, the better job I can do for you, just based on what I know your preferences are, or, I'm more comfortable with calling and just asking any question, just to give you, the customer, the best, most optimal application that they can get, because it's not a cheap thing. So that's something that I think makes a really big difference. It makes my job a lot easier, and I think that customers appreciate it as well.
As you look forward in agriculture then, what are you excited for?
Just excited for another season. Spend all winter working on airplanes and turning wrenches and stuff to make sure that when we get in them during the season, we have minimal downtime. And so I'm really just looking forward to being able to get in the airplane and just fly over the ground a lot. Like I know a lot of the farmers out there are looking forward to get out of their shops or out of the feed truck and get back into the sprayer, the planter, the combine, and start turning some dirt or planting some seeds or spraying some crops. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most here in 2024, is just to be able to get out and provide a service that's needed and is critical for our community.
If someone is listening and thinks, wow, that's a really cool job, what would your recommendation be to get started?
I would say the best thing to do is to get in contact with your local ariel applicator, whether that's me in Reno or Rice County, or if you're out in Western Kansas or Southern, wherever you are, and even surrounding states, there's more of us out there than you think. And so just going to your local airport, finding where the crop duster is, and just talking to that guy one-on-one is a great place to start. They can give you pretty much any pointers that you need to get into the business. But it's not an easy business to get into, so it's be ready for some obstacles for sure.
If people would like to learn more information about Alpha Ag Air, how can they do that?
Alpha Ag Air, we are on Facebook, Alpha Ag Air LLC, and on our Facebook page, you can get all of our contact information to contact us. You can contact me personally. My phone number is 620-207-0113, or you can look us up on FBN. We are active on that website, and all of our information is there as well. And I do believe if you just give us a Google search, Alpha Ag Air, we're like the only thing on Google there. So we're pretty easy to find if you need us.
John, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us a little bit about your business.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I think looking into different areas of agriculture is important, because there's a lot of spokes in the wheel that make the world go around. So I appreciate the opportunity.
That was Reno County Ag business owner John Schweizer. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.